Rebel Devs Podcast, a show that challenges conventional thinking in the tech industry. Each episode features conversations with solutionists who have taken unconventional approaches to problem solving, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in their respective fields. Join the devolution.
Hey, everybody. I'm your host for Rebel Devs, Tom May, along with my partner in crime, Jonah May. How are we doing today, Jonah?
Well, it's Monday, so about as well as one can do.
Yeah, it's funny. It's Monday now, but they're listening on Friday. So you're on the downtrend, they're on the uptrend. And to keep us balanced and excited, we have our friend from Veeam, Jason Buffington. Jason, good morning, afternoon, or whenever we're listening. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning, good afternoon, and whenever you're listening too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Today, we're going to riff like we always do and try to bring a little bit of the outside the Veeam box. We're Veeam focused, all of us. And rather than having yet another conversation about things we've talked about, we're going to try to deviate a little bit and focus on some education, which is, I think, near and dear to each of us here on this podcast. So myself, been kicking around in the world. I'm in my 40s here. I'll disclose it. So kind of in the middle of career, I like to think. Maybe my wife wishes it was closer to retirement, but maybe our bank accounts say different, right? We have Jonah here, who's kind of on that front end side for perspective. And Jason, I'm not going to speak where you are or demographic you. I'll let you do your own talking here, sir. So where are you?
So I am early 50s. So I have been in IT and mostly data protection for 35 years. So even before I got out of college, Fighting Tech Security class in 1991, I was swapping tapes at a local property company. And then from there, I was fixing PCs. And I have been backing stuff up for 35 years.
My goodness. How crazy does that sound to say? I mean, that is just wow.
We're going to talk about education. So as I mentioned, I went to school for computer science. I minored in criminal justice, which seemed like a really weird combination at the time until you fast forward 35 years and realize that cybercrime is actually one of the biggest problems that IT is facing right now. So I kind of lucked into two things that were interesting to me and have turned into a career that, paid for a house and a couple cars, and a couple tuitions and yeah, so there you go.
That's pretty cool. My background, I was a person looking at West Point in high school, and I was going to be legacy multi-generation in there, had all my ducks in a row to go, and ultimately thought, well, I don't know that I want to do this. My girlfriend at the time was not really wanting Army brats, so I withdrew everything. And I'm like, where am I in this world? And I thought, I really like computers. I've been playing with them since my Commodore 64 days, right? I grew up in the heart of IBM country in the Hudson Valley in New York. And I start thinking, maybe this computer thing, like, it's fun. Maybe it could be something, because I didn't know that it was really a career unless you were an IBM guy. And I start kicking around and looking, and there's comp sci, program. And while I was more of a batch file guy, I really enjoyed building systems. And then eventually, hey, is there a way in which we can connect these systems, and getting our very first baud modems into Prodigy and different things, and realizing there was no real career path as I saw it over there. I ended up becoming a business major, and I really thought this has nothing to do with computers. And I go into a full business track. I get a regular job in retail, and I'm blessed enough to be able to fall into a software company that wants to take cash registers and start making them computerized. And boom, we start into the IT track that way. I'm not a developer. I'm an analyst. And then all of a sudden I'm in a technical group where we're connecting and doing banking, credit card communications and different things. And how do we protect these machines? And it blossoms from there. So it's a little bit of my background, and I love to touch upon the points, which we'll get to later. Jonah, what about your educational background? Where are you in all of this?
Well, I have kind of worked education at the same time that I've gone up through my career. So I was in school working on an undergrad in computer science when I started as an intern at a previous Veeam service provider, worked my way up through there, started as like the server builder and tape jockey, then eventually into some of the support, implementation, development tracks. And I've continued to work towards that undergrad, in part because I'm so close to it. So why give up now? but it has gone a bit slower because it's kind of almost taken the backseat to the career development, given that I've worked them in tandem, even though a lot of people in my generation seem to maybe put the focus on education first and then career later. So currently I've got about 24 credits left. I've gotten a couple certifications here and there, mostly on the Veeam side, but just a couple as they've popped up along my career track. Like the past 6 months, I've gotten the Linux Foundations from LPI Institute and the ITIL Foundations certs. And coming out of school, I'll be looking at some of the more introductory stuff, just because it's stuff I've already worked. That makes kind of sense just to knock it out nice and easy. So like maybe a CCNA, some of the introductory cloud certs.
No, that's awesome. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more later, because I know you're also at Western Governors right now, which is a very good track, I think, especially when it comes to traditional education. One of the challenges I had in my degree is while I was a business major, I felt it almost took me 3 years of repeating high school until I could start getting into meat and potatoes of things. And I've looked at some of your tracking and it's quite different. So absolutely different there. So, all right, Jason, you are a guy, you're in your undergrad, you're in comp sci, you're coding. Did you kind of hit a wall somewhere where you're like, I don't know if this is me. My brain doesn't work this way and I want to offshoot? Like, what does that look like?
So I thought I was just going to be a coder, right? And actually, you mentioned you were on track for West Point. So I actually turned down an Air Force Academy slot. And turns out, at least back in the 90s or late 80s, actually, when you turned down an academy slot, you actually got an ROTC scholarship to wherever else you wanted to go. And I wanted an academy experience. I also wanted to date normal people, like on weekends and stuff. And so the Cadet Corps at A&M gave me 5 days a week of a military corps and then weekends off. And so for me, that was the right balance. So when I did computer science, I thought it was a means to an end. I was going to go sit in the back seat of an F-15. I was going to do my 9 years on contract. To me, that was just, you need a piece of paper before you can go get in the back seat. And that was my plan. My senior year, Desert Storm was going on. And so we had some options to get. I mean, there was a few things that kind of rolled into that, but that's not the path that I ended up taking along the way. Meanwhile, though, I'd been coding for a long time. I coded in high school on a 64. I coded in college. And then after about 4 years, I said, this is not fun. And I was taking a class my senior year at A&M, and the class was on networking. The prof there, he's actually still down at Aggieland, named Willis Marty, was one of the architects for the Pentagon's network infrastructure. There's some other details in that. But basically, he said, look, we're not going to work the textbook. We're going to look at what networking really looks like. And so we did packet sniffers and we tore down packets. And I looked at, what does technology look like in play? And for me, that was IT. In fact, the counterpoint to yours, though, was I wish I had taken some business classes. I took a computer science major. I took a criminal justice, which wasn't even offered at A&M. I had to get some offsets to get that worked out. But I had no business vernacular. And we'll kind of fast forward that because that kind of led me to MIT 35 years later. But yeah, so that's how I started along the way. Was I knew I did not want to be a coder. I fell in love with the idea of the implementation of technology. And so I got right out of school and went into the VAR distributor ISV micro ecosystem. Jonah, I love what you said about certifications coming out of the A, especially in your 20s, right? So, and I did the same thing. So I worked for a VAR, and back then Novell was the king of the hill. And to be a reseller at a partner, in fact, that's still true in most software vendors today, you had to have a certain number of folks that were certified on not only the base platform, but some of the advanced certifications as well. So I'm 22, 23 years old. My brain is wired for ingest information, process information, do well on a test, right? Been doing that in engineering school for 5 years. Meanwhile, I got these old, cranky, late 40s, early 50s, chain smoking SEs who say, I don't want another cert. I know what I'm doing. And so I did my cert, and then I'd go over to them and say, hey, you need me to take this instead of you? Because reseller didn't care. So I'd go take that one. And then I'd go the next cranky SE, and I'd say, you need me to take your SE? And I'd take that one. And before it was over, I was a master CNE and and then there was like one more test, and I was a CNI, and I had to test out in Utah. And so I was a master certified netware engineer, a certified netware instructor, and this thing, Windows 3 was coming out, and NT 3.5 beta was out. And so I said, well, maybe that'll be a thing. Microsoft doesn't screw it up. I guess I'll try that too. And before long, I was an MCT, MCSE. I was training on all of them. But the certs unlock so many new paths. So many new paths. If you're listening and you're in the first 10 years of your IT career, go put some letters behind your name. Just period. Just as many as you can find.
I like that. And the transition, like I mentioned, Jonah's Western Governors. And Jonah, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I interviewed a gentleman fresh out of the University of North Texas one time. And I was so impressed because they didn't have a lot of IT experience. They had some internship in school, working the UNT help desk and whatnot. But I was so impressed. Here was their bachelor's degree in computer science with a focus on network and security. But they must have had about 15 different certifications from the CompTIA folks to Cisco. And I remembered sitting them down. I was like, how in the world can you get, and they weren't easy certs. I mean, some of these were upper level Cisco certs. And I was like, how can you focus on school? And he said, well, that was the great thing is my mentor at UNT really helped them develop a program where you would take a class that had a lot of the source material. And he would say, all right, now buy an exam prep book because you have 90% of the information. And before you forget it, like you were saying, the ingest and output, same thing. And I thought, oh my goodness, like they got it. Like they're finally understanding on the college campuses what we need. Jonah, is that what you're seeing with WGA today? How is that paralleling?
I think it's pretty close. So the nice thing about Western Governors is they're fully accredited if you look them up. They've got by one of the major boards, I don't remember who, but a lot of the West Coast state universities are accredited by the same board. And number one, the tuition I have found is a lot more economical than a lot of other colleges because they're actually a nonprofit. They were originally founded by several state governors, but hence the name. They're in the West, founded by governors, Western Governors. But they actually, it's a lot more free form than you find at a typical college. Even online classes, I've gone through the progression of I did a semester or two at University of North Texas straight out of high school. But by then I was working at Starbucks, so I transferred over to Arizona State. And then even just making that transfer, Arizona State had a really great program. And I had originally started there in large part because of the name behind them and their notoriety, especially in the STEM fields. But then as I started to progress into my field, it kind of reached the point where, I had some career experience and I didn't feel that what school I went to and having the big name on the marquee was as great of a deal because I already kind of had my foot in the door with like Veeam certifications and the experience. And so Western Governors is a lot more flexible. Like at this point, I really haven't finished out those last few credits because I haven't taken enough time to just sit down and knock them out. It's no longer in the world of, oh, I'm in a calculus class for 7.5 weeks and I have to do 30 question assignments 5 to 6 nights a week and take a proctored exam. This is very much I can sit down. They give me full coursework I can go through, practice assignments, textbooks, everything. But if it's a subject I already know, like networking and security fundamentals, like with the things I've done at service providers, I clearly know, base OSI layers, what a VLAN is, how a firewall works versus a router. In that case, it was really just kind of sit down. And if I wanted to, I could immediately take the final exam or work on the final assignment. And if I passed, I was done with the class and I had the credit. And in some cases, they take it a step further. So networking and security fundamentals, they flat out say in the course curriculum and some of the guides afterwards, like, hey, this will prepare you for the CCNA so you can go and take it on your own. Some of the other classes, they don't even run their own exams. They just give you some exam vouchers. And if you earn the certification, they consider you passing the class, give you course credit. And that's how I've ended up with like my ITIL Foundation cert and the LPI Linux Essentials.
That's great because I remember one of the jokes, Jason, maybe you remember this, the mid to late 90s, you used to see like bachelor's degree of Windows NT, like in job rec. And you'd be like, that's the one I want to apply for selfishly because whoever's writing this has no clue what I will do all day long. But what I would say is and we've talked about this a little bit before off session, was a little about the humanities side. And I'm going to tee it up a little bit. And shocker here, I'm going to expose myself a little bit here, but I look forward to the Jason Buffington and the Dave Russell trending reports, and I get all excited for about 2 minutes, and then the eye glazing happens, Jason. You're like 20%, and you're all in the numbers, and I'm just like, oh, why? But then you start the journey, you start telling the story. And that's where you kind of bring me around to like, oh, I'm perking up now. Like, oh, this is what we're doing and why. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, how do you take such boring data? Sorry to, call out your career here, but then you like give it some like refreshingness to it. Like, take me on that journey.
Well, so the journey starts back at Texas A&M. So when you're an engineering student, you're required to take a few liberal arts classes along the way to prove that you're actual full-blooded human. And candidly, the two classes at A&M out of 5 years between computers and criminal justice, the two classes that have actually served me best in my career, technical writing and Greek mythology. Technical writing, if you're going to be anywhere in the engineering or the business world, to be able to accurately move information to relate things succinctly is a skill and one that not enough people know. And then Greek mythology is all about storytelling, right? And I mean, you can start with Greek mythology. I was always a comic book nerd and I was a movie nerd. And, the nerding continues through this day. But from my perspective, it's just stories. So once you look at data, there's two things you need. You need data and you need context. So data, when you look at research, is like if you take a screenshot of somebody doing the weather forecast on the local news. See all the numbers on the page. Oh, look, it's hotter here than there. Great, I'm up here. And of course, if you're in Texas, it's hot everywhere. That's a different story. But all you're looking at are numbers. And some of the numbers are bigger or smaller than other numbers. And that's lovely. Doesn't tell you what to do with it. If you look at like a radar and you can kind of see how the numbers are changing over time. Okay, trajectory. That tells me if it got hot and then it got cool again. Now I know where I am in the cycle. I can plan for that. That's a step in the right direction. But then when you take context, so again, I've been in IT for 35 years. So I've backed up a lot of stuff. I've recovered a lot of things. I've been through my share of disasters. So once you can actually start looking at data trajectory over years, and then I just flat would ask, so I would ask, what are all the problems in a survey question? I've got 20 questions here. What is your main problem that you're having? What are all the problems you have? Well, I'm having these 5. What's your main problem that you're having? I'm having this one. And then you go and ask that by 500 or 1,000 different people. And what that does is it starts to give you a really nice curve. And you can understand, okay, now I know what their problems are. I see where the data is going because I see it over time. And then if you like telling stories, there are stories to be told. And then you're just trying to tell people not the story of what happened, but what you should do about it. And that's mostly what I get paid for now. So it's a lot of fun.
That's such an amazing journey, looking backwards to where you started to where you are. And I've actually probably known you 3 or 4 years, maybe a little bit more here. And we've had conversations about scouting and some of the circles we run in and through. But I've watched this shift of trying to figure out, like, when people introduced me to you, I honestly didn't know who you were. And they're like, oh, Jason does this at Veeam. And I'm just like, there's a million Veeamers, in my mind. I'm like, well, what do they do? And they're like, pretty big deal. And I'm like, okay, cool. To me, it was just like, oh, scouter guy over dinner. We're having a conversation and whatnot. But in trying to understand, okay, well, what is Jason's real sphere at Veeam? And in the last couple of years, I've seen this pointed definition. But I think what's even more awesome about it is following you on LinkedIn and some of your Facebook and watching your personal journey that maybe a lot of people don't know. And you did a really great job of documenting it on social media. I think I watched you start the MIT journey, but then it's turned into the whole 2-Minute Mondays. Like now it's like a culmination and it's going, and I love it. And we're both friends with Jim Tedesco, and I call him the fortune cookie of wisdom. And I always look for his points and I love reading them. And I'm just like, this guy's just so amazing and encouraging. And then I've known you in that realm too, but now it's like it's blossomed. So I love the social media side. And so what made you want to document through MIT, and how do we get to this 2-Minute Mondays? Like, what does that look like?
We'll do the 2-Minute Mondays first. So if you haven't watched them yet, so I try to do a 2 to 2 minute and 59 second ish video. Most Tuesdays, they drop usually 6 a.m. U.S. East Coast time every week. My goal is to try to give you something fresh to think about. And if you are spiritual in nature, you can think about it like a Monday morning devotional. If you're not, just, give you something fresh to look at. And those are, a lot of them are reflections of other stuff that I'm learning at the time. A couple weeks ago, I'm in a book club on resilience, personal resilience. And there was something that was inspiring from that. And I'd shared a story there. And so I thought, that should probably make a 2-Minute Monday. Candidly, I'm really blessed in that Veeam lets me do a lot of mentoring, a lot of one-on-one coaching, but I actually don't have any direct reports right now in my current role. And I miss pouring into humans. And, you mentioned we have scouting in common. And for many years, so I've been in scouting for about 18 years. A vast majority of those, I've been a chaplain for one unit or another, or a counselor at a camp, that kind of thing. And so in scouting, it is not a single religion. In fact, some folks don't even have a religion yet. They're still seeking. And so I try to always make the messages that I would run in scouting on a Sunday morning, they have to be accessible to everybody, regardless of my faith traditions, et cetera. And some of those have also been fodder. So if you're in scouting, if you've ever used something called the Scoutmaster Minute, some of those nuggets will also show up in 2-Minute Mondays. But it's just a way for me to kind of pour into some humans. The community has been very generous and kind and affirming of some of the messages. And I think last week's did like 14,000 views and a stupid number of reposts. And so anyway, it's been a fun endeavor. I said at the beginning of this year that I was going to start pouring back into people in a different way, since I don't do that managerially at work. And the reception's been pretty good.
I love it. I mean, that is the crux. I was a scouter from a youth on up through, volunteered in college years. I've probably been involved, I tell people, really 40 years by the time I break it down. I only had a couple of years difference. And I didn't realize till I was an adult the value of mentorship. And I think that's always carried through in my career, or at least I've tried to, because I was blessed with another Aggie in my career that I'll share with. When I left the software company, I went to work for a school district, and there was this older gentleman, Bill, and he was 70 something and I'm like 22. So guy's like light years away from me. I'm in New York. He's talking about this Aggie thing. Listen, man, I don't even know what Aggies are at this point. I may live in Texas. I have no idea this Corps of Cadets. Like, what is this guy telling? But he was such an amazing mentor. He would listen to this 22-year-old kid drive a school district's budget and tech. And I loved him so much because it got to the point where my day would start like this. I would walk in and have coffee with the custodial staff. They were a great bunch of guys. And we'd sit there and we'd have coffee, and another tech would come in, and we'd check our phones at the time, or actually, I'm not even sure we had email on our phones. We'd check our email and pagers, and nothing would be on fire. So we'd sit down and we'd talk, and we'd just think about things. And then we'd go to Bill, and Bill would just be like, well, could you do that yourself? And we're like, I don't know. It's never been done. Could we do it? And so there came a point where people were actually filing grievances, because it's a whole unionized system in New York. And they're like, these guys just drink coffee all day. And so I remember he calls me in before the superintendent, and he says, all right, Tom, can you show me what you've worked on this week? And I come in and I have napkins. It's almost like Southwest Airlines. I was like, well, Joe and I were talking, and we realized that in the last capital campaign, they put ISDN ports up in every single classroom, but we don't have ISDN lines because we've realized it's really an outgoing technology, and we've got all these T1s everywhere. So we were like, could we have a TV station over that? And is it IPTV? If we change some of the wiring and we use a Windows streaming service and a video toaster, we could do this. He's like, great. What would it cost us to do that? And at the time, we're like, $5,000. He's like, thank you. And then he's like, here's a prepared proposal from a consultant that wanted to charge like $2 million or something ridiculous to do all of this rewires, and we need bond. He was like, gentlemen, that's why you allow people to think. And I always appreciated Bill. And before I hand it over to you to jump into the whole Aggie thing, that was a lot of his culture that he brought with him. But I will love this forever. Bill taught me an important lesson. I used to be a fighting spirited young man that would have to die on every hill. And he told me one time, he was so smart. He goes, sometimes when somebody wants to do something, encourage them to do them and give them so much homework they'll never do it. So teachers would come to us with these harebrained ideas, and I would try to be like, this is the dumbest idea ever. And Bill would be like, I like your thinking. Let's talk about what we can do. So we're going to set a series of meetings where we can do X, Y, Z. And by the way, I need you to research this and do this and bring this. And eventually he would pile on so much work that either the person would do it and it would be spectacular, or they would run away, and he would be like, just be an encourager. let people do their thing. So I love that. And then I moved to Texas to understand what this whole Aggie thing is. But I see more and more maroon on you, Jason, more and more and more. And so, and I think, didn't your daughter go to MIT, or am I right in that? Or
No, my daughter's down to A&M.
Oh, A&M. Sorry. Oh, yeah.
But again, I'm thankful that the color scheme for MIT and the color scheme of Texas A&M are so similar that my wardrobe palette didn't really have to change much as I added another school to my alumni status. So
what's that like? Because Jonah was actually, if I remember correctly, a candidate to go into MIT that came down, and we were excited back in the day that, like, you know, we're picturing a beautiful mind scenario on campus, just this think tank and different companies working there. Is that really what it's like up there? Like, I've actually
It actually kind of is. I mean, like, you know, you walk down these marble hallways and you do kind of actually feel smarter just by kind of hanging out in the space. The curriculum I took there, so I've done 2 programs there so far. I did a 16-month program specifically for chief product officers. So it's run out of the MIT Sloan Business School. Again, remember, I was missing business from my undergrad. It was not master's classes. Let's be very, very clear. So this is not postgraduate work. What they do is they take the same profs that are teaching many of those classes all year round for master's students and PhDs, and they boil it down into 6 to 8 weeks at a topic, what you would need for your kind of role. And so there is a year-plus long track for chief technology officer, for chief product officer, chief digital officer, chief sustainability officer, right? So all of the up-and-coming disruptor CXO roles. And after 30 plus years in IT, you'd think, well, I know this. In fact, I've been in backup this whole time. So surely I know everything that I need to know. And what I figured out, and the reason I sought to go to this chief CPO school, by the way, there's a few other schools that do it. Stanford does one, and Northwestern does one. There's a few. Penn does one. But if you're an engineer, you go to MIT. I mean, it's just what you do.
Of course.
What I was missing was the vocabulary, right? So I've been, for the last 6 years at Veeam, I have reported to one of the C-level senior leadership team. I'm in my second boss, who is in the C-suite. And so for my next gig, I'd like to be in the C-suite. Just that simple. And so I was missing the vocabulary and the taxonomy, that the point of view of, instead of owning a function, how do you own an actual area of contribution to the whole business? And so I was missing that. And so for me, I didn't think an MBA would have given me that, because it still would have just been more academically centric. I wanted something that was going to give me the taxonomy of the C-suite. And so I spent 16 months on that. And it literally was changing, mind-blowing. So I would be in a class on product design, and I'm in the product strategy team at Veeam, right? You should think I would know this. And I've been an analyst before that, and I knew how all the companies were building their products. And yet there is a prof, Gronfeld, there that just blew my mind with, how do you understand what stakeholders want, right? Before you build anything, do you understand that you're building the right thing? Or should you have built it at all? Is it a problem worth solving? And have 8 weeks on that. Is it a problem worth solving? What are the range of things that you haven't thought about on how to solve it? How do you decide the right thing to solve? And then how do you measure, did you build the right thing afterwards? They don't teach that in other programs. And so those were the kinds of classes that I think have really elevated how I talk about our products, how I talk about our industry. I've started doing a lot more LinkedIn articles that are not Veeam specific, just about our industry overall. And I can absolutely credit MIT's program for that.
Is there anything to do with the shift of kind of skewing at Veeam? I know I've seen a big change over the years to kind of, I'm going to say on the main products here, VBR, Orchestrator, those sorts of deals. Like, I feel like for years I've always, and we kind of worked a little bit on this over a dinner one time, like the whole why Baz when you can Draz sort of concept. And then I kind of took it on my side, and I think you've always said it more eloquent. I'm always like, are you really backing up if you're not testing? Like, do you really know this? And it was always a hard sales journey. And I'm not a salesperson. I'm just passionate about what I do. And I'd be like, no, VBR, no brainer. Veeam 1, okay, monitoring important. Don't know a huge lot of value as a standalone kind of thing. But in the full suite, it's like, look at the cat's meow now. Like, look at this. And then all of a sudden, I start seeing this fundamental shift at Veeam to where it's like, we can actually have this conversation now because it's tracking through. I mean, did that come into play at all, this experience you had with getting there, or what?
Yeah. And because obviously, I think a lot of folks that watch your show probably are Veemers. So here's a little bit of inside baseball for you. So one of the classes I was actually taking is the same Groenfeld class, by the way. I went into the class and they let us bring, with some NDA boundaries and some anonymization of data and that kind of thing, they let us bring our real world problems into the class. And so I'm having a discussion. I'm about 2 weeks into this class, and the thing I wanted to solve for is, why doesn't everybody buy Orchestrator, right? Because as a longtime DR guy, I know that Orchestrator fulfills the promise of VBR, right? I mean, you bought VBR because you knew on your worst day you're going to have reliable recovery. But as soon as you start doing it at scale, that becomes arduous. And so whatever you can do to orchestrate runbooks, workflows, and testing and documentation, why isn't everyone buying Orchestrator? So I'm 2 weeks into this class on product design, and one of the TAs challenges me. She said, "You're asking the wrong question," because I'm trying to figure out how to solve go-to-market. She said, "Should you have built Orchestrator at all?" And like, oh, crud. I mean, because we're, 4 years in at this point. And so I went back and said, I'm going to pretend we don't have an Orchestrator product. I'm going to go interview the folks that likely were around at the time. What is the problem to solve then? What is the problem to solve now? And then, using my new stakeholder interviewing skills, go interview a bunch of stakeholders that actually weren't part of the original process. Do we need orchestration, right? Is that a problem worth solving? And so I went through the discipline from the course, figured out, yes, we actually do need an orchestration layer. Should that be for sale? Should it be built in? Should it be in a cloud plane? Should it be on-prem? So you start looking at all the variations. And when you did all the work, what you actually found out was it needed to be a for sale on-prem implementation of a work stream, of a workflow. And it's like, oh, good, we built the right thing. But having gone through that process, then you could figure out, okay, so if that's the right thing, the study also showed you what would you need to make that successful in market. Well, you'd need that to actually be part of a suite. You couldn't monetize it standalone. No one would buy it that way. Oh, wait, that's actually what wasn't happening. And then you start looking at, the skewing was different. The positioning was wrong. And then about 6 months later, and I'm not going to say I solved Orchestrator's go-to-market. That's not what I'm saying. But 6 months later, you saw the 3-tier suite come out. You saw it no longer had a different per-seat monetization model. You saw that the suite started with the comprehensive portfolio and then worked backwards based on budget, as opposed to starting with foundational VBR and then only talk about the other things when you need them. But in my mindset, that was a complete 180 that came out of, let's make sure it's a problem we're solving. Do we understand what we need to build? And then how do you measure that we actually delivered the right thing? That came out of that course for me.
It was pretty amazing because I saw a shift without knowing it was a shift. I saw the reskewing. I thought, well, that's great. But so often in my journey, I deal with some of the ISRs and I'd be like, hey, we need to start moving people this direction. And I swear to you, I would almost get this every single time. It was like, no, nobody really buys that thing. Like their focus wasn't there. They didn't understand it. And then probably a couple months after the shift in skewing, I would approach a customer with this because we do a lot of audits at Different Dev. And sure enough, the customer would actually be educated that this product existed. So I knew the conversations were actually happening, which was awesome. And I know we're coming to the end of our time here. We'd love to have you back and delve into more of this because this is a great conversation. I want to give everybody some time for closing thoughts. I'm not going to have any because it would be an unlimited show then. I'd ramble crazy. So I'm going to let our guest have the final word here before I play out our dancing music. But Jonah, give us some thoughts here. You've heard a lot of things. You know where you are in your journey. Any advice to those folks coming on up or in your shoes?
Listen to the 2-Minute Mondays. They're very helpful. And, there's many different ways to approach wherever you're wanting to get. But, a lot will get you there, a lot won't. And find a good mentor.
I like it. All right, Mr. Buffington, you get the final words before we play ourselves out.
So I'm certainly a huge fan of mentoring. It's been a big part of my life. I've been a beneficiary as well as hopefully a giver. On the topics of education, if you're in your first 5 years, go get more letters behind your name that are in your name. Because that's going to open doors. That's going to unlock resumes. You're going to get through the HR filters so that you can get in and start doing the work. right? And after you start doing the work, you're going to figure out what you're passionate about, and you'll probably figure out somewhere in your journey, there's a few things that I wish I had more skills in, whether it's a business acumen, whether it's depth in cyber, depth in networking, in my case, vernacular for the C-suite, whatever it is, you're going to realize once you figure out the path that you want to be on, there's going to be something you're going to go back on. Don't be afraid to go back, right? Don't be afraid to, get a couple new books a year, challenge yourself, a new book every 3 to 4 months, go through some books, find that extra education, but never stop learning.
I love it. Great place for us to head out and dance out. And Jason, like I said, we definitely want to have you back. I'd love to continue this trajectory of education. I think it's so important for people to hear real world examples of how they do it. And that's what I do love about even the entire Rick Vanover's team. A lot of folks coming up there, we've seen them come from, hey, I didn't know anything. I got involved on socials. I started taking free classes. And now you look at their career directory and you're just like, my goodness. So I think this is very valuable for folks out there. So I'm going to play us out for everybody listening. Check us out most Fridays, some Fridays, all Fridays. We don't have a schedule. We try, but good way to end your week listening to us. Thanks all. We'll talk to you soon.
Whether you're a seasoned solutionist or just starting out, the Rebel Devs podcast is a must listen. So join us. Comment, share, and subscribe. Be part of the Rebel Devs.